Kia ora koutou. Thank you all for joining us online today and welcome to the first Multi-Ethnic Young Leaders Speaker and Networking event for the year. My name's Justine Roberts and I will be your moderator for this evening. So I would just like to start by acknowledging KPMG for sponsoring the Speaker and Networking series this year and for investing in the mahi and kaupapa of Multi-Ethnic Young Leaders New Zealand. And for those who might not be aware, our kaupapa is to eliminate the barriers that exist and persist for ethnic New Zealanders and tangata whenua, so that all New Zealanders have access to the same opportunities and resources to succeed academically and professionally. So, in line with this kaupapa, this Speaker and Networking series invites speakers from a diverse range of ethnicities and backgrounds to share their story, their ideas, and their leadership journey with future leaders like yourselves. Now, we have a wonderful speaker with us today, but before I introduce him, I just want to open with a karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa pounamu te moana, hei huarahi mā tātou I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tātou I a tātou katoa, hui e, taiki e. Kia ora everyone. Well, it is now my great pleasure to introduce Mervin Singham as our speaker this evening. Mervin is the first Chief Executive of the newly established Ministry for Ethnic Communities and is a very experienced public servant. So prior to his current role, he was the Executive Director of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse in State Care and in the Care of Faith-Based Institutions. That's a mouthful. He's also held a number of executive leadership roles at the Department of Internal Affairs, including at Deputy Chief Executive level, as well as Director for the Office of Ethnic Affairs. And separately, he's also been the Chief Mediator at the Human Rights Commission. So very impressive career background, and I could go on, but I do want to make sure that we have a lot of time for your questions and to obviously hear from Mervin. So I just want to very quickly say how you online can take part in this kōrero. So you want to go to slido.com, that's www.slido.com, and enter the event code, which is 513639. And don't worry about writing this down because someone's going to be putting this in the chat box. Just let us know if you have any issues though. So once you're on Slido, just submit any questions, and I think you can upvote questions that you like from others as well. So while you're here on there, I will kick off with the first question. So finally, tēnā koe, Mervin.
Tēnā koutou katoa, everyone.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And I've given a very high-level rundown on some of your professional roles, but it would be really great to just start off with your backstory. So who you are, where you whakapapa to, and your journey really to today.
Great place to start, Justine. Thank you very much for the introduction. So yes, I was born in Malaysia. I came to New Zealand 35 years ago to study law at the University of Canterbury. I come from a really interesting family. My father's Sri Lankan, mother's a mix of Portuguese and English, and we had a nanny who was Malay, and she stayed with us for about 40 years, like a second mum, if you like. I grew up in an incredibly diverse environment. Malaysia is, a hot, humid, multicultural country. And at home, it felt like we had some of the great faiths of our, of our world at home. So dad was Hindu, mum Christian, nanny Muslim. We spoke several languages interchangeably. Food was amazing. I think it kind of created a openness and curiosity to different cultures and people, which I'm very, very fortunate to have had. So I can remember, asking my dad, like, how come there are a million gods in your religion, Hinduism, and Mum, your God, there's only one in Christianity? Or asking my nanny, why do you pray 5 times to Allah? Doesn't he hear you when you pray once? These sorts of things that a child can ask, but maybe as we grow up, we become a little bit more politically sensitive, politically correct, and we avoid talking about diversity and inclusion the way we should. So very lucky that I brought all of that to my life in New Zealand. Back in the 80s was really different. In Christchurch, I think I felt I was the only brown person. And at university, there were hardly any Asian students, a handful of us. And it was kind of challenging. And I learned a lot from my experience there, both things that, adversity that brings about more stronger character, and also a lot of good things, a lot of opportunities I learned from being in Christchurch and in New Zealand more broadly. So that's just a little snippet, I guess, of who I am and my background, my family background, my whakapapa and all of that.
That's perfect. And you mentioned that you studied law at University of Canterbury as well. A lot of our listeners online, I bet, are quite early in their careers and might be thinking about that next step, whether that be in the public service where you've been for a while or whether it's a legal career. What were some of the main factors for you in deciding where to go to or, where your interests lied?
Well, that's a really good question because, my mum and dad, when they sent me to New Zealand, they wanted me to study law and then come out and be a lawyer. And that's what I planned. And I had I finished my law degree with honours and had a gig planned with Buddle Finlay. Bell Gully. Quite a few years back. And just about to go and do the job, I did an internship and then had the job offer to come to Wellington to do that. But, I'd been a really kind of like model Asian son, Asian student kind of thing. And I thought I want to do something different, much to the shock horror of my family back home. I decided to run a restaurant, believe it or not.
Nice, yeah.
I thought, look, I've got my law degree. I've always followed the path that my family wanted me to. So why not try something off the beaten path? So I ran a restaurant, believe it or not, for 4 years. I was 20 to 24, and it was a pretty out there thing to try. But I really recommend people trying something different because if I'd followed a law career immediately after, I don't think I would have had the exposure to what it's like to run your own business and to be exposed to people from all walks of life that come into your restaurant for, hospitality and all that sort of stuff. So I really encourage people to think about doing something different to stretch your career muscles, if you like. And then after that, I went to work with an oil company and actually here in Wellington. And this was probably about 5 years after, finishing my law degree. So I was doing some legal work there. And I learned something about that. I learned it wasn't my thing. It kind of wasn't my thing. The money was good. The career opportunities were good, as you can imagine. But it just didn't kind of feel like something I wanted to do. It just didn't feel right. And I decided to apply for a job as a mediator with the Ministry of Housing. And so it was just a job, like somewhere to start after finishing in the oil company. And I remember that one of the mediations I had was like in the first couple of weeks or so, there was a young solo mother with 3 kids who couldn't pay her rent. And the landlord was like going hard, he wanted to pay the rent or evict her. And I was the mediator assigned to that case, and I had to kind of help solve the problem. And I saw real integrity in this mother. The landlord said, look, I'll just forgive your rent, but you need to get out after that. And she said, no, I want to pay the rent. It's just working 3 jobs. I want to pay the rent. That's who we are. I want to do that. And then hopefully you let me stay. So I helped her work that out. So that was successful. And that was a kind of like a turning point for me. I felt something in my gut. I felt good. I felt, wow, it's cool to be able to help other people. And that's the beginning of my career in the public service, and I've never turned back.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. We do have a couple of questions online at the moment. One is, how should we be talking about diversity and inclusion?
I think we need to talk about diversity and inclusion openly and respectfully. And I think people sometimes trying to be respectful avoid talking about it all, so they're not open at all. And actually, when we live in a diverse country like New Zealand, and many people here will know that New Zealand is one of the most diverse countries in the world. We have 213 ethnicities in our country. We speak more than 170 something languages. It's like the whole world is within our borders. And, people will think differently about things. They'll have different beliefs. They'll have different value systems. These are wonderful things that we can celebrate, but there are also challenges that come with them. When we believe very different things, very different ways of operating at work or in the community, the way you deal with those things is by talking, connecting, learning, and understanding, but do it respectfully. And I think that we need to create a lot more opportunities for those sorts of dialogues to occur.
Right, yeah. And I guess taking it to maybe your own personal experiences, have you experienced barriers in your journey, where you would have thought, man, diversity and inclusion would have been great right about now?
Yeah, I have, So I remember being in Christchurch, which, as I said before, was very different back in the day. And I remember, I come from a good family, we're all educated, all that sort of stuff. And I was in a dairy and with a Maori friend from university, and I saw the dairy owner like turning over like this to follow us as we went through the aisles. And I was thinking, what's going on, So I asked my friend, why is he looking at us? And my Maori friend, obviously born here and was probably accustomed to that, he said, because we're brown, mate. And I said, what? He said, yeah, they're worried we're going to nick something. And I felt a sense of like, what? A sense of outrage. How can you think I'd nick anything? We're not like that, So I felt, that was the kind of one of the first times I saw people seeing my color and appearance and associating it with negative stereotypes. And once I became aware of that, it was very difficult to, turn your eyes away or pretend it wasn't there. And I began to see it in a whole range of things, like simple things, like at university, I'd hear students talking and they'd be talking about all these Asian honors students, which actually included me.
Yeah.
They are really hardworking, which is great. I mean, I love being hardworking and being thought of like that. But when they talked about Pākehā honors students, they said they're really intelligent. So I thought, how come we're not intelligent as well? That's a minor thing, but these subtle things, I saw that throughout my career. And it's changed. People are a lot more accepting. They're aware of their stereotypes and the need to address it. But we still got a long way to go. And recently I met some public servants who shared the challenge they've got of having to prove themselves. They have to work harder to prove that they are capable. They have stereotypes that people around them might have of their capability, and they can't be themselves sometimes. They can't bring their whole selves to work. And I thought, I'm lucky to be in the ministry where we can do something about it.
That's wonderful. So speaking of this ministry that you're now leading, can you take us through maybe the vision of the ministry for ethnic communities and then maybe some of its main priorities? Some people might not be aware of these since it's quite a new ministry.
So the ministry was set up as a result of the Royal Commission to the Mosque attacks in Christchurch. That Royal Commission made a recommendation that there should be a ministry that can give advice to the government on ethnic diversity and inclusion. So the ministry has been set up by the government as the chief advisor to the government of New Zealand on ethnic diversity and the inclusion of ethnic people in New Zealand. So we have a policy arm, as you'd expect, to give advice to government on a range of things, health, education, immigration, all those sorts of things. And we have a strong community arm where we connect with all these diverse people across the country to learn what are the challenges they've got, what are their aspirations, what policies are affecting them in an unusual way that actually we could fix by giving government the right advice. So that's roughly what the ministry is about. And our vision, I guess, is to improve the well-being of ethnic people so they can be like any other New Zealander in terms of their opportunities, all the things they want to achieve in the country, that there are no barriers, impediments. And maybe one step further than that is that we unlock their full potential for New Zealand. So many ethnic communities are internationally connected. They're connected with markets that New Zealand is trying to connect with. They bring fresh perspectives to how we solve problems. They create a vibrant cultural life in New Zealand by bringing and celebrating their festivals, their foods. There's so many things that we can tap into for our humanity to make New Zealand better by strengthening the fact that we're diverse and we can tap into that full potential. So I guess one is to prevent disadvantage, support people to be fully living their lives in New Zealand, and in doing so, unlocking the full potential that people bring to this country for all of us, not just for them.
Right. And do you have an example maybe of some of this like impactful mahi that the ministry has done since it's started?
The past 7 months or so since I started in the role and since the ministry commenced, that was on the 1st of July, has been, I'm going to use the word plagued by the pandemic. So there were lots of people around the country that said, we don't understand some of the things government's saying because English is not our first language. We're not used to navigating complex information. We're scared of the vaccines. How do we know if it's halal? You know, how do we know if it's got beef derivatives in it? We heard there are lipids or fats in the vaccines, so we're scared to have the vaccines. There was a whole range of things like this that we discovered. We just can't take it for granted that a lot of ethnic people in our country just receive information like anybody else. So we had to connect with these communities and connect them with agencies like DPMC, Ministry of Health, MSD, to answer their questions. One example was a family in the South Island that needed food support because there was a lockdown and all that. And they said, we're not eating. And we said, why? There's a food bank service you can go to. Here's where you go. And they said, well, we don't know if the food's halal and we can't eat. We'd rather not eat than to eat non-halal food. So we went, oh, okay, we've got to connect with MSD to give them the information they need about where they can get halal food. And there's a range of things like this that we've been doing while we've been working on other bigger ticket policy issues like employment barriers for former refugees, migrants, and well-established ethnic communities, focusing on women, youth, rainbow community, all that. So there's a range of other things we've been doing as well. Yeah. Building cohesion is another area we've been involved in. People need to feel they belong, their identity is valued, they can trust all our public institutions. Some people go, we don't trust the government in the country we came from. We're scared to engage with government. Yet a healthy democracy needs people to trust and engage. So we're doing work in that space as well. And I could go on, really. Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah. That's great. That's really, important work that you're doing. So we have another question online. We often talk about equity of outcome, but what about equity of opportunity? How can we attain equal access to opportunity for all?
That's a very good question, because on the face of it, a lot of New Zealanders who are fair-minded would go, you know, when there's a job advertised, everybody can apply. So everyone has got equal opportunity. Go for your life. You can go to university, you can go to, do anything any New Zealander can. So they may not always understand why some communities might, or some people might feel that they don't have the same opportunity. So in my thinking, what we need to do is to improve the understanding of people that afford these opportunities, to understand the barriers that they might have that are invisible. So for example, there was a piece of research that's well known, I think by Victoria University, that talked about foreign names on CVs. And they did this study where they created these CVs, fictional ones. There were ones, same qualifications, same work experience. One had a Chinese name, one had an Indian name, one had a Pakia name. And they sent it out to recruitment agencies to see what would happen for particular jobs that were advertised. And they found that the Chinese and Indian ones were almost always kind of put in the bin because they were seen as not, quite suitable for employment. And when the research findings were published, people were shocked. See, that's what we're doing. They didn't even know they were doing that. And that also happens even after you're successful in being, interviewed. In the interview phase, even research tells us people can face cognitive bias. So, for example, a confident African person might be seen as arrogant, whereas a Pākehā person might be seen as assertive and confident, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So people don't know they're doing these things, and this is where the ministries are advocating for cultural intelligence, the development of awareness of cognitive bias, how it plays out, and what you can do about it. So there are things like this that we need to do across the board, whether it's employment or access to services or participation in our economy, anything. We need to understand what's going on so we can sort it. And it's all our benefit that we do.
That's great. And so the ministry, how does the ministry define ethnic communities? And I guess what's the relationship between your ministry and, for example, like the Ministry for Māori Development or Ministry for Pacific Peoples?
Yeah, I know. I talked to my colleagues in Te Puni Kokiri, the Ministry for Pacific People. We are what we call population-based agencies. The definition of ethnicity includes faith and, where you come from, your belief system, all of that. And the definition that government uses for the ministry is anyone that is non-Māori, not Pākehā, and not of an Anglo-Saxon culture. So that's pretty broad. And that's the definition we use. And sometimes people say, well, we've all got an ethnicity, which is true. But for the government's purposes, that's the definition. And our relationship with the other agencies, I guess some of the examples I've given, before, they'd face those things too. So there are areas that we can collaborate on where it's mutually beneficial for everyone. And there are also things that are very different. Some of the issues the Pacific community faces and the things they want to achieve is different from many of the ethnic communities we work with. So we are trying to find areas we can collaborate to strengthen New Zealand, and other things we need to do respectively in our own agencies.
Excellent. So I'm just going to read some of these questions we've got online. How can we navigate conversations or relationships with people who reject that racism exists without compromising our haora?
That's a tough one because, when there's a lot of people actually think we're not racist. We don't do discriminatory things. They may not be fully aware of what those things mean and how it plays out, because racism is about power. It's about societal power and the dominant culture of a country. All the institutions in New Zealand, they are created on the based on the Westminster system, borrowed from Great Britain, and they haven't been created by Maori or Pacific or many of the ethnic people that we work with. And that means the dominant culture in New Zealand has got more ability to influence things that are happening in our country than these other cultures. I'll just give you one small example, which is how HR is managed in organizations. I was talking to a Maori colleague the other day, and she said, when you have an HR problem, somebody's doing something you don't like, there's a procedure. You make a complaint, and then it's individually investigated, potentially, and all the parties are treated as individuals. And sometimes that runs counter to Māori culture, where it's collective. When there's a problem, it affects everybody. We sit down and we talk about it. So for Māori and for many ethnic communities, the individualism that underpins the HR systems that we use, they can feel uncomfortable. That's not how we do things. So that's how benefits obviously in having the systems that we do. But over time, we need to accommodate and make them more flexible to be more inclusive of different worldviews, so we can solve HR issues, if you like, in different ways. So that's just one example of, how institutional racism, as some people would call it, is expressed. And not in that full-on way that people often think about, but in a subtle way that does make a difference to people's lives. So to answer your question, or the question that was asked about how do we talk to people about racism when they say it doesn't exist? In my life experience, not just my career, one has to be authentic, and one has to go the extra mile, like meet the person more than halfway. Generosity always wins the game, in my thinking. If somebody doesn't understand they're being racist or discriminatory, they have nothing to gain from learning that they are, or well, they may have something to gain, but less so than the person that's needing them not to be racist, right? So that person has to invest more in reaching the other side, and to do it respectfully, without blame, without anger if you can, but genuinely engaging with that person. And that's what I believe brings change.
Yes, no, I definitely agree with you there. Another question we've got online: how do we get more ethnic people into mainstream leadership roles, and to normalise ethnic leaders being experts in areas other than their race, ethnicity, or diversity and inclusion?
Very good point, and one I think I've grappled with in my own career. So, with my skills and experience, I didn't want people to look at me as just, doing brown people's things, to put it bluntly, because we are all so capable of doing so many other things. And I, as a senior leader, as I was going up the echelons in the public service, I often felt both the privilege and the burden of people watching Mervin Singham and going, we haven't worked with people like him, from Malaysia, or brown people like him, and we wonder how it's going to perform. And having to contend with some of their negative stereotypes about my capability. But I always felt this thing about, I need to succeed, and maybe even go beyond succeeding, so they'd see other people who come after me as also capable. So I felt that, obligation, it wasn't just a job. I had to get it right for all the other people that would come behind me. It was a challenging thing to do. But I'm hoping that as more and more of us, get into these senior roles, people will actually begin to acknowledge that we can get on with the job, even excel, maybe do better than some of them themselves are, and sort of blaze the trail for others. Yeah, it's a real honor to be able to do that, and not just in things related to, brown people's concerns, if you like. Yeah.
That's right. I guess related to that is another question we've gotten: how do you hold yourself in situations where you are a visible minority?
That's a tough one. I remember going to a big senior leaders event once, and I walked up to the reception desk. It was like a conference center with a number of conferences going on, and the people at the desk, this was for senior, public servants. The people at the desk, this was some years back, they said, "Oh, you must be in the other conference room over there," because I think they didn't think you could be a senior public servant, somebody that looks like me. So I looked and they said, "Oh, that's my name badge, I think." And they were a little bit, went red and sort of gave me the name badge. And then I walked into this room and there was a sea of Pākehā faces. And just momentarily I felt a twinge of like, oh, I'm different from them. And I could see they were looking at me and they could see I was different too. It takes courage. And I'm saying this to all the young leaders here. Takes courage to go in there and do your job and do the best you can, and also to be an ambassador for everybody else. Now, some people I know will say, Mervin, that's imposing an extra burden on people that they shouldn't have to bear. That's perhaps so, but that's how it is. That's life. And we've got to prove ourselves and bring the other side on our side, if you like.
That's great. And that's great leadership quality, and perhaps warrants a leadership-focused question. So what do you think represents a good leader off the back of what you've just said? And has your perception of leadership changed over time at all?
Yeah, I think my perception of leadership has obviously changed since I was much younger, when I started as a young manager. I think for me, a really good leader, and I've held true to this for some years, is you have a clear vision of where you want to go and why you need to be there. The group that you're leading or whatever it is you're doing, you see that. And then a good leader is about leading people. It's about being, it's about people. How do you get people on board to want to go to that destination that we all need to go to? And there's far more to it than meets the eye. Each person is different. you need to care, you need to support, you need to consider how they're seeing what you're trying to do. You need to get behind them, not always be in front. You need to empower, genuinely empower, trust people. It's about it. I've learned, for me anyway, I'm sure everyone's different, but for me, being a good leader is about leading people, and underline the word people. If you get that right, the journey's a lot easier and you'll get to the vision much easier.
That's great. And do you have any advice for people potentially wanting to enter the public sector? I know that your ministry has quite a good graduate program.
Yes, we do. Yeah. It is wonderful to see these graduates who are full of aspiration, wanting to contribute to policy and security or economic development, all these really important areas of life in New Zealand. So that's one way, to apply for the graduate program. I hope it continues. We're doing our best to make it, a sustainable program over time. I think you need to be visible, number one. Many people in our communities aren't networked as much as people who are born here, for example, who know somebody's auntie or uncle or somebody's already in the public service. So you need to find opportunities, and this is a great opportunity. I'm so delighted that KPMG, hats off for having a network like this established. Get out there, be visible, perform. People at the end of the day want people who are doing the job and doing it well, a good team play, all of that. So do all those things, have courage. As I said before. And increasingly, I'm saying to people, if we are truly to benefit from the diversity that we've got, then our employees, the public service, need to be themselves. They need to be comfortable being themselves. And if I can just share one example.
Please.
I remember when I was the first executive team I was a part of, and somebody raised an example in the corridor before about this. My boss was putting an idea on the table, the chief executive was putting ideas on the table, and my colleagues, the deputy chief executives on the table, were challenging him and saying, oh, that's a really bad idea, I don't think you should do it, that kind of thing. And I felt a bit reticent to do that, because I sort of thought, he's the leader, he's the boss. In Malaysia, my wiring, is you have deference to authority. Doesn't mean that you don't challenge. You challenge when they invite you to. You didn't just go and say it's a bad idea. So I held back. And over time, I begin to wonder whether my boss was thinking, Mervin is not participating, without understanding what's my cultural wiring. It took courage for me to say, retain your wiring and be yourself, but also learn some new skills to actually, participate. So these are the sorts of things that help us excel in the workplace. And I'm not just talking about ethnic people, it could be anybody, learning to do different things in different ways, because we're dealing with people, whether they're leaders or staff or whatever, customers. You're dealing with people. So you've got to find nuanced, different ways to navigate your way with people, not have one stock and barrel kind of way of doing things. And that's what diversity and inclusion is about.
Excellent. Just trying to look at some more of these.
I'm glad there's so many questions.
There's so many questions. We'll be here a while. So I guess related to that, do you still suffer from imposter syndrome? And I guess you've recognised there's a cultural element potentially sometimes to this as well.
I'm glad that, these are the sorts of things we should be talking about. The answer is yes, I do have like an imposter syndrome, but it's fading rapidly. So it occasionally pops up and I question myself, but I've learned over time to moderate that, because some questioning of, am I doing the right thing? Is this me? Is healthy. You need that. But if it's too strong, because you're imbued all the stereotypes you're getting and then you start questioning yourself and it prevails, then it's a bad thing. So that self-awareness is where, if there's a negative talk starting in my head about being an imposter, I address it and say, okay, calm down, just go back, you're doing okay. So it's normal, and again, as I said, it takes courage to go, it's all right to have a bit of imposter syndrome, because we all live in New Zealand society where you can be othered sometimes, and people have perspectives of you, and you internalize that. Maori tell me that that happens to them too. Pacific people tell me that happens to them. It's normal, but recognize it and then bolster yourself.
That's great. Just got to read through them before I ask them, you know.
And choose the best ones.
So you've mentioned working, this is another question online, you've mentioned working with Te Puni Kōkiri. How else does the Ministry of Ethnic Communities honour te tiriti?
Well, I think every Crown agency has to honour te tiriti. But apart from the legal obligations the Crown has that we all have to abide by, I actually think it's about our humanity. And I'm astounded actually by ethnic communities that actually embrace te tiriti and have knowledge of te reo and Maori tikanga and all that, much more than many other people. And they say frequently to me, and the ministry's kaupapa is based on this, that we cannot truly belong in New Zealand until we're embraced by tangata whenua as the first peoples of this country. So they want to do this, and the ministry wants to support them. And the first thing a lot of people are saying to us, and we agree and support, is to connect Maori with ethnic communities a lot more. And there are many things that bind us. Many ethnic communities come from a history of colonization. Many people understand what the stripping of your identity and your reo, can do to your people. Many understand discrimination and racism, institutionally even. Many understand collective ways of doing things. So there's many things that bind us. Our respect for elders in many cultures, those sorts of things. So there's so much room for us to connect with Māori for mutual benefit. And it's amazing to see, for example, in the Christchurch mosque attacks, Ngai Tahu, as iwi, reached out and did amazing things to support that community voluntarily. And that community has built that strong relationship with local iwi for that reason. So long may that live, that kind of thing.
Someone's just tautokoing your message about how tough it is to constantly have to represent your community all the time, both a privilege and a burden, they say. And then another person says, are we all representing our communities? So are you consulted for your opinion as an individual or for your views on behalf of a collective?
Yeah, sometimes people ask, what do you think about something? I wish it wasn't that way. I wish it wasn't that when people see me at work, they go, well, I wonder how he is how we're going to see other people. And not maybe everybody does that, but a great many do. And we know this. We know this from all the statistics on disadvantage that we see. One example, Diversity Works published a piece of research that said migrants in the IT industry, I think it was the IT industry, if you're from America, North America, Canada, Australia, white countries, then you get paid more highly than people doing the same job from Africa, India, China, Philippines. So these kinds of statistics reveal at a systemic level how collectively people are perceiving the value that those IT workers bring. You can't refute that. The facts speak for themselves. So that's how it is. And if we want to bring change, we've got to be hands to pump and do it together, hard as it is.
We do have a question here about mental health as well. So mental health conversations tend to have a bit of negative stigma in some ethnic community groups. And how do you think we can change this to support ethnic rangatahi?
I think it's through education. We discovered this through the COVID-19 period, where a lot of ethnic people were raising issues that they were facing. Many had not been connected with their whānau back, the country of origin, or family couldn't come over. Some businesses were suffering because they couldn't bring migrant workers to support them. So there was a lot of pressure, and they faced some unique situations that created mental health issues. But many people didn't want to talk about it. So we said, okay, what do you need to be more comfortable? And there's two things. One is us having the kōrero with our own communities and saying, mental health, it's normal. We all get depressed from time to time. Some people longer than others, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And the other thing is to have culturally appropriate support. So post the mosque attacks, Christchurch Muslim community, they needed trauma-informed support, counseling and all that, There wasn't enough professionals in New Zealand who are culturally capable to support them. But if they were, then those people would have used them more. And they told us, when somebody cites a verse from the Quran, we understand and they understand us, we feel more comfortable sharing our grief, that sort of thing. So I think that's another thing we need to do, is develop more culturally capable mental health service providers who can meet the needs of these ethnic communities and encourage them to come forward when they need help.
That's great. So what have been some of the challenging moments in your career as a public servant, someone asks? If you've got a list.
I think I do. It's a long list, I guess. Working in the abuse inquiry, Royal Commission of Inquiry into Historical Abuse and Care, that was a really challenging gig, because we were working with really, survivors have been damaged by abuse. And we really had to put our hard hats on, and say, it's not about us. These people, they need justice. They need to be seen. Their stories need to be heard so it never happens again. It's part of their healing. So that was a very challenging time where we were working with people who understandably were distrustful of any sort of institution because they'd been let down. And we had to go beyond the call of duty, if you like, to reach them and embrace them compassionately. So that was a tough gig. I've also done some things with the UNDP, where I went to conflict-ridden zones, the Middle East, Fiji, all that. Yeah. And that was really eye-opening as well, about seeing how our human rights, respect for each other, all these basic things we take for granted are so essential. And when we don't have them, then we have a breakdown of society, and we lose which is most precious to how we live every day in New Zealand, for example. So those are some challenging times, and I could write a book on all the challenges of being an ethnic minority and working in a predominantly Pākehā environment, which has that challenges. But adversity builds character. And I'm very grateful for those experiences, ironically.
That's right. Yeah. And I guess there's been a lot of changes since your time back in your earlier days leading the Office of Ethnic Affairs, and where we are now with the ministry. And I know that there was the mosque attacks, which, provided the catalyst for this ministry. But what other changes have you seen which have, paved the way?
Yeah, I've got a lot more optimism now, because I see a genuine drive to do diversity and inclusion, if you like, better. It's authentic. People want to engage. They want to learn like never before. There are some people that say, there's no racism, we don't believe it, everyone's got equal opportunity. But in the majority, people are up for the discussion. They want to learn. A huge number of organizations have got training and cognitive bias, things around improving CQ, or cultural intelligence, the organization. People are working very, very hard at increasing the diversity of their workforces. There's a sense of we need to do the right thing. And I'd encourage everybody who's listening to tap into that and be a part of that journey. Yeah.
That's great. Someone's just saying that your comment about respect to not challenge the leader in a meeting resonated with them. They asked, would it be offensive to ask for information regarding rules to follow to improve this? Not sure if you can interpret that.
I think this is the thing, you see. Some people think if we want to learn to deal with different cultures, including maybe some people from our ethnic communities wanting to learn Pākehā culture, you go to a rule book, right? And it says, this is how you do things. Now, sometimes that's helpful. If you're going to another country to negotiate an agreement, you might need to know how they do things, and a rule book can help. But really, the thing you need to learn is how to be flexible and observe very carefully what's going on, and then tailor your response according to the context and the people or person you're working with. This is a skill everybody should learn, not just mainstream. All of us need to learn that. With my staff in the ministry, I see them all as individuals. So one might want you to chat and have a warm, personal kind of connection. Other people want you to be very clear what you want them to do. Other people want to be left alone. You just tell me the outcome and I'll do it. They're all different. And as a leader, if you treat them all the same, you won't get a good outcome. You've got to watch and say, okay, Jasmine wants that. Jack wants a little bit of that instead, and then tailor your response. And I think if you do that, then you can work. You're developing CQ already by doing that.
That's right. And obviously they'll be happier and you'll, have a better working environment.
Totally. Yeah.
That's right. If anyone has any final questions, I'm just putting it out there, let me know, because we're coming up against the time a little bit. Nothing else coming through. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to our future leaders?
Yeah, I really hope all our future leaders that you all actually pave the way for the leaders that will come after you, so that a conversation like this will seem ancient, because it's not required, because everyone sees they've got equal opportunity, they feel they belong, they feel they can contribute, and they're just a part of society like anybody else. And that's what we should all aspire to. And we can only make the change if we participate in it.
That's great. Well, thank you for that, Mervin. I feel like we've come up against the time now, and I'm sorry we weren't able to get to some of the questions, but we'll end it there, I think. And thank you for coming, sharing your journey with all of us, with our future leaders. It's great to have access like this to, people like yourself. It's really quite amazing. And finally, my thanks to KPMG as well for sponsoring both this event and the events later this year as well. And just before we head off, I think I'll close with a karakia. So, po hihiri, po rarama, po o te whakaro, po o te tangata, po o te aroha, te po e here nei I a tātou, Māori ora ki a tātou, haumi e, hui e, tae ki e. Thank you all again for coming, and ka kite.
Ka kite.